Boston, 1919, a city brimming with life on the cusp of a new decade. The Great War had ended, and a sense of relief, of optimism, hung in the air. Among Boston's bustling industries, one stood out for its unexpected prominence: molasses. This thick, dark syrup was far more than a sweetener in early 20th century America. Its versatility made it a sought-after commodity, and Boston, with its strategic location and thriving port, became a key hub for its storage and distribution. Towering above the cityscape, a colossal steel tank stood as a testament to the city's reliance on this viscous commodity. From the outset, the construction of the molasses tank was plagued by concerns. Whispers of shoddy workmanship and rushed deadlines circulated among the workers. Leaks, a constant annoyance, were hastily patched with little regard for long-term solutions. These warning signs, however, were largely ignored, brushed aside in the relentless pursuit of efficiency and profit. The year was 1915. World War I raged across Europe, and the United States, though not yet directly involved, felt the conflict's ripple effects. The demand for industrial alcohol, a key ingredient in munitions, soared. In Boston, the United States Industrial Alcohol Company saw an opportunity to capitalize on this demand, and the company's ambitions centered around a massive construction project in the city's North End, a gargantuan tank designed to hold millions of gallons of molasses. The tank's construction was a spectacle in itself. As the tank neared completion, a series of troubling incidents raised red flags for those who cared to notice. Leaks, some small and some alarmingly large, sprang from the tank's seams. Rather than address the underlying structural issues, the USIA opted for quick fixes, patching the leaks with whatever materials were readily available, often little more than tar and scrap metal. Residents of the North End, accustomed to the sights and sounds of industry, couldn't shake off a growing sense of unease. In the years that followed its construction, the molasses tank became a fixture in the North End landscape. Yet, beneath the surface of normalcy, danger lurked. Each time the tank was filled to capacity, the pressure on its walls increased exponentially. The people of Boston went about their lives, oblivious to the potential danger lurking in their midst. January 15th, 1919, dawned clear and unusually warm for a winter day. The North End, a tapestry of cobblestone streets and tightly packed tenement buildings, was alive with activity. Children played stickball in the streets, their shouts and laughter echoing off the brick walls. January 15th, 1919, dawned like any other winter day in Boston. A crisp chill hung in the air, but the sun shone brightly, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets of the North End. Shortly after 12:30 p.m., the seemingly unyielding structure of the molasses tank reached its breaking point. A sharp metallic groan, audible for blocks, echoed through the North End. The ground trembled, and a deep guttural rumble, like the growl of a monstrous beast, emanated from the tank's depths. Then, with a deafening roar that shattered windows and sent birds scattering in terror, the steel plates buckled and gave way. The molasses, relentless in its advance, surged down Commercial Street, engulfing homes, businesses, and everything in its path. People, caught off guard by the suddenness and ferocity of the deluge, struggled to escape the rapidly rising tide of sticky goo. Some were swept off their feet, their screams swallowed by the churning maelstrom. As quickly as it arrived, the initial wave of molasses receded, leaving behind a scene of unimaginable devastation. Buildings lay in ruins, their walls reduced to rubble, their interiors filled with a thick, suffocating layer of molasses. The air, thick with the stench of the sticky goo and the faint, sickly sweet scent of death, was difficult to breathe. The streets, once bustling with life, were now a treacherous morass of debris, twisted metal and molasses, some areas several feet deep. The initial roar of the molasses flood quickly gave way to a haunting silence, broken only by the cries of the injured and the panicked shouts of rescuers. The air, thick with the cloying sweetness of molasses and the bitter tang of industrial chemicals, was difficult to breathe. The streets, once bustling with life, were now a treacherous labyrinth of debris, twisted metal, and sticky brown goo. The North End, a vibrant neighbourhood known for its close-knit community and lively spirit, was now a scene of unimaginable devastation. As the initial shock subsided, a spirit of resilience and compassion emerged from the chaos. Rescuers, their clothes stained brown with molasses, worked tirelessly to free those trapped. Doctors and nurses set up makeshift aid stations, tending to the injured with whatever supplies they could salvage. The air, thick with the scent of molasses and antiseptic, was filled with urgency and determination. George Leahy, a young police officer, was one of the first on the scene. Without hesitation, he waded into the sticky morass, searching for signs of life. Hundreds of volunteers joined Leahy, digging through the debris with shovels, pickaxes and bare hands. As darkness descended on the devastated North End, the rescue efforts took on an even greater sense of urgency. The air, now bitterly cold, carried the sounds of hammering, shouting, and the mournful wails of those who had lost loved ones. Bonfires, fueled by debris from the wreckage, cast flickering shadows across the scene. The injured, many covered in molasses, overwhelmed the city's hospitals. Makeshift morgues struggled to cope with the growing number of dead. The air was thick with the unspoken question, how could such a tragedy have occurred? Amidst the chaos, stories of heroism and selflessness emerged. In the aftermath of the flood, the official death toll stood at 21, but many believed the actual number was higher. Some victims, their bodies swept into Boston Harbor by the receding wave of molasses, were never found. Others, their bodies so badly mangled that they were unidentifiable, were buried in unmarked graves. The molasses, once a symbol of sweetness, had left a bitter legacy of loss and heartbreak. The impact of the disaster extended far beyond the immediate casualties. Hundreds of people were injured, many of them permanently disabled by their injuries. The North End, once a thriving community, was left in ruins. Homes and businesses were destroyed, their foundations irreparably damaged by the corrosive effects of the molasses. The financial cost of the disaster was staggering, estimated at millions of dollars in 1919 dollars. The task of cleaning up the molasses flood was monumental. The sticky goo, now hardening in the cold winter air, clung to everything it touched. It took hundreds of workers armed with shovels, hoses and even salt water from the harbour, weeks to clear the streets and begin the arduous process of rebuilding. The stench of molasses lingered in the North End for months, a constant reminder of the tragedy. The clean-up efforts were hampered by the sheer volume of molasses and the extent of the damage. The sticky goo, now mixed with debris, twisted metal and even human remains, had seeped into every nook and cranny. It coated the cobblestone streets, filled basements and cellars and clung to the walls of buildings. The air, thick with the scent of molasses, was a constant reminder of the disaster. As the days turned into weeks, the clean-up efforts continued, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of tragedy. The North End, though scarred by the disaster, would eventually rebuild, but the memory of the Great Molasses Flood would forever be etched into the city's history. a cautionary tale of the devastating consequences of industrial negligence and the enduring power of human compassion. The devastation left by the Great Molasses Flood was undeniable. The human cost, the shattered families, the sheer scale of the destruction. It demanded an explanation. The city of Boston, still reeling from the shock, sought answers. How could a towering symbol of industry, a fixture in their midst, transform into an instrument of such chaos and loss? The investigation began immediately, a quest for truth and accountability. The city's newspapers, fueled by the public's demand for answers, launched their own inquiries. Reporters, armed with notepads and a growing sense of outrage, fanned out across the city, interviewing survivors, witnesses, and anyone who had even a tangential connection to the ill-fated molasses tank. Theories abounded, ranging from the plausible to the outlandish. Some whispered of sabotage, of anarchists targeting a symbol of American industry. Others speculated about a freak weather event, a sudden shift in temperature that caused the tank to rupture. Yet, as the investigation progressed, a more disturbing narrative began to emerge. One rooted not in malice or acts of God, but in something far more mundane: human error and corporate negligence. The focus shifted to the United States Industrial Alcohol Company, USIA, the owners and operators of the molasses tank. Their practices, their decisions, their relentless pursuit of profit over safety came under intense scrutiny. The investigation into the molasses tank's construction revealed a litany of shortcuts and oversights, a cascade of errors that ultimately led to the disaster. The tank's design, though impressive in its size, was fundamentally flawed. The steel plates used in its construction were thinner than industry standards dictated, barely able to contain the immense pressure exerted by millions of gallons of molasses. The rivets, intended to hold those plates together, were spaced too far apart, creating weak points that were ripe for failure. Moreover, the construction itself was marred by haste and a disregard for safety protocols. The USIA, eager to bring the tank online and capitalize on the wartime demand for molasses, pushed the construction crews to work at a breakneck pace. Shortcuts were taken and corners cut to expedite the process. Welders, under pressure to meet unrealistic deadlines, often worked in less than ideal conditions, their work compromised by haste and fatigue. Inspectors, tasked with ensuring the tank's structural integrity, were either pressured to overlook glaring deficiencies, or their concerns were simply ignored by USIA officials more concerned with profit margins than public safety. The tank, intended to be a symbol of industrial progress, became a monument to corporate greed and indifference, a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. The investigation into the molasses flood delved into the scientific reasons for the tank's catastrophic failure. Experts, brought in to analyze the wreckage and the properties of molasses itself, uncovered a fascinating, albeit tragic, interplay of factors that contributed to the disaster. It turned out that molasses, a seemingly innocuous substance, possessed hidden dangers when stored in such massive quantities. Molasses, a viscous liquid, undergoes significant expansion and contraction in response to temperature changes. The warm weather on the day of the disaster, unusual for January in Boston, caused the molasses inside the tank to expand significantly, putting even greater stress on the already compromised structure. This expansion, coupled with the ongoing fermentation process within the molasses, which produced heat and gas, created a volatile situation within the tank, pushing its structural integrity to the breaking point. The rapid release of millions of gallons of molasses, propelled by the immense pressure within the tank, created a wave effect, amplifying the destructive power of the flood. The molasses, denser than water, slammed into buildings and people with tremendous force, its viscous nature contributing to the difficulty in escaping its grasp. The investigation into the Great Molasses Flood ultimately placed the blame squarely on the shoulders of the United States Industrial Alcohol Company, or USIA. The company's negligence, their reckless disregard for safety regulations, and their prioritization of profit over human life was laid bare for all to see. The public, outraged by the findings, demanded justice. The city of Boston, along with hundreds of individuals and families affected by the disaster, filed lawsuits against the USIA, seeking compensation for their losses. The legal battles that followed were lengthy and complex, with the USIA employing a battery of lawyers to deflect blame and minimize their liability. However, the weight of evidence against the company was overwhelming. Eyewitness accounts, expert testimony, and the company's own internal documents painted a damning picture of negligence and disregard for human safety. In the end, after years of litigation, the USIA was found liable for the disaster. The company was ordered to pay out millions of dollars in damages to the victims and their families, a financial penalty that, while significant, could never truly compensate for the loss of life and the lasting trauma inflicted upon the city of Boston. The North End faced the flood's aftermath with grief and resolve. The disaster, a result of industrial negligence, shattered families and left the community in ruins. Yet, a spirit of defiance emerged. Immigrant residents demanded justice. The legal battle against USIA was long and arduous. The company employed many lawyers to deflect blame, but the North End residents, backed by public outrage, persisted. They packed the courtroom, a reminder of the human cost of corporate greed. The Great Molasses Flood, a disaster that had unfolded in a matter of minutes, would have a ripple effect on American society that lasted for decades. The sheer scale of the tragedy, the shocking loss of life in such a bizarre and preventable manner, sparked a national conversation about industrial safety and corporate accountability. The disaster exposed the inadequacy of existing building codes and safety regulations, particularly when it came to large-scale industrial structures. The public, horrified by the revelations of negligence in the molasses tank's construction and maintenance, demanded greater oversight and accountability from both corporations and the government agencies tasked with regulating them. The disaster became a rallying cry for reform. The legal battle that followed the flood, culminating in the USIA's admission of liability, set a precedent for corporate responsibility. It sent a clear message that companies could no longer hide behind legal loopholes or prioritize profits over the safety of their workers and the communities in which they operated. The disaster, though born of tragedy, became a catalyst for change, ushering in an era of increased regulation and oversight for industrial operations across the United States. While the legal battles raged on, the residents of the North End began rebuilding their lives and community. The physical scars were erased, replaced by new construction and time, but the emotional scars lingered, memories of that terrible day. The Great Molasses Flood became a part of the North End's folklore. Old-timers would recount stories of the flood, their voices hushed with awe and sorrow. Even today, the memory of the Great Molasses Flood resonates in the North End. The Great Molasses Flood, a tragic footnote in Boston's history, serves as a stark reminder that the pursuit of progress must always be tempered by a commitment to safety and a respect for the potential consequences of our actions. The disaster, born of a toxic mix of corporate negligence, human error, and a disregard for the safety of workers and residents, stands as a cautionary tale for the ages. The lessons learned from the flood continue to resonate today in an era where industrial accidents, while less frequent, still pose a significant threat to human life and the environment. The disaster underscores the importance of robust safety regulations, rigorous enforcement, and a culture of accountability within industrial operations. It highlights the need for transparency, for open communication between corporations, government agencies, and the communities they serve. The legacy of the Great Molasses Flood is a complex one, a tapestry woven from tragedy, resilience, and the enduring human spirit. It is a story of lives lost and lessons learned, of a community forever changed by a single catastrophic event. It is a story that continues to resonate, urging us to remember the past, to learn from its mistakes, and to strive for a future where such tragedies are never repeated. The physical remnants of the Great Molasses Flood were erased relatively quickly. The molasses eventually washed away by rain and seawater. Yet, certain traces of that fateful day lingered. For years, residents spoke of a faint, sickly sweet aroma, particularly on hot summer days, its presence a ghostly reminder of the tragedy. The Great Molasses Flood, though a localized disaster, sent shockwaves far beyond the confines of Boston's North End. News of the bizarre tragedy spread quickly, capturing the nation's attention and sparking widespread calls for reform. The disaster exposed the inadequacy of existing building codes and safety regulations, particularly in rapidly industrializing cities where the pursuit of profit often outpaced concerns for public safety. The flood became a rallying cry for greater government oversight of industrial operations and construction projects. It highlighted the need for independent inspections, for stringent building codes that took into account the unique properties of materials like molasses, and for accountability on the part of both corporations and the government agencies tasked with regulating them. In the years following the disaster, numerous cities across the United States adopted stricter building codes and safety regulations, a direct response to the lessons learned from the Boston Molasses Flood. The disaster, though born of tragedy, spurred a nationwide movement to prioritize public safety and hold corporations accountable for their actions, a legacy that continues to shape industrial practices and regulations to this day. The physical scars of the Great Molasses Flood may have faded with time, but the emotional and psychological impact on the survivors and the community lingered for generations. The trauma of that day, the sudden chaotic violence of the flood, the loss of loved ones, the lingering fear. These were wounds that ran deep and did not heal easily. For many survivors, the memories of that day, the deafening roar of the collapsing tank, the suffocating wave of molasses, the desperate cries for help, haunted their dreams long after the event. Some, particularly those who had lost loved ones, carried the weight of survivors' guilt, questioning why they had been spared while others had perished. The disaster also left its mark on the collective psyche of the North End. The neighborhood, once known for its vibrancy and close-knit community, was now indelibly linked to the tragedy. The flood became a part of the neighborhood's folklore, a cautionary tale passed down through generations, a reminder of the ever-present potential for disaster even amidst the familiar rhythms of daily life. The Great Molasses Flood stands as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the capacity to rebuild and recover even from the most devastating tragedies. The North End, though forever marked by the disaster, emerged from the wreckage stronger, its community bonds forged in the crucible of shared loss and collective healing. Today, the site where the molasses tank once stood is a vibrant park, a place for children to play and for residents to gather. It is a poignant symbol of renewal, of life reclaiming a space once defined by tragedy. The memory of the disaster, however, is not forgotten. A plaque, erected near the park, commemorates the victims and serves as a reminder of the lessons learned from that fateful day. The Great Molasses Flood, though a dark chapter in Boston's history, ultimately underscores the power of collective memory, the importance of learning from the past, and the enduring human capacity for compassion, resilience, and renewal. It is a story that continues to resonate, urging us to approach the pursuit of progress with caution, to prioritize the well-being of people and communities, and to remember that even in the face of tragedy, hope and healing can emerge from the wreckage.